Greetings, magnificent souls, to the Attract Health, Build Wealth podcast, where we have open and honest discussions about ourselves. This is a place where we break away, and break through codependency, allowing ourselves to attract health, build wealth, and live a peaceful life. We are tired of being sick and tired. We are tired, but we are not giving up. We know that there is something magnificent inside of us. And because we are fighting daily, hourly, and by the minute, fighting ourselves, our kids, our spouses, we have to do things differently. We have to break the cycle. We don't have a million chances. We have to be happy now. We have to find a way. So how do we do that? How is that possible? If you look around at what society is telling you, they tell you that what we're doing is impossible. Yet it's happening every single day. And it's happening through the practice and love that we call awakening the magnificent soul. We are all magnificent souls, and these are our stories of healing. Today, in episode 35 of the podcast, I'm starting part 1 of a 10-part series all focused on control. Today, specifically in reference to confrontation and how that plays out in a codependent scenario, and maybe some triggers or warning signs you may see in yourselves or in others. But before we get into this discussion, don't forget to let me know your thoughts about this episode, any feedback you have, or anything you'd like me to cover on future podcasts at epiphanyvault.com. Remember, you can share anonymously. It is a safe place, and I would welcome the discussion. Speaking of the Epiphany Vault, a huge shout out to Michael, who wrote in some months ago, and here's what he wrote. He wrote, "My epiphany was opening up the book Codependent No More, and that started me on my journey of recovery as a codependent, which also led me to your podcast, and I just can't seem to get enough. I am relating to so much of what you are saying. Thank you." Michael, thank you so much for listening and for the kind feedback. Codependent No More actually for me was really one of the first big influences as well, and it definitely started me on my path to awakening. And to anyone out there that doesn't have it on your bookshelf, I would highly recommend getting the book. Likely it will be a big eye-opener for you as well. And I'm so glad that we're all working on this together. Michael, you too, to be the most magnificent that we can be. I hope you love on my friend and love yourself, of course. And going back to today and thinking about what I might discuss today, I thought that this would be a good time to talk about control. Control and codependency are so deeply intertwined, and most of the time kind of an unconscious behavior. And I probably, just a kind of an asterisk, I probably will be referring to the state of being unconscious during the series. So I want to go ahead and define it here of what I mean so that it doesn't get confusing. And please do keep in mind that as we are defining these words, they're really just signposts in order for us to try to have a discussion. Being a certain way, either good or bad, is really not what we are going for. We already are magnificent as we are. In fact, I think being good or bad, or trying to categorize something as good or bad, is very human. But I also think it's kind of sometimes can be a codependent way to think about things. But we work to try to be present as much as possible by accepting our present moment and surrendering in a very present way. So the way that I'm referring to unconsciousness stems a lot from my study of Eckhart Tolle, and I'll link up in the show notes for you what he says about unconsciousness to make it a little more clear. But the way that I'm referring to a state of unconsciousness is a state of not being present in the now. It's a vibrational feeling of unease, discontent, boredom, or nervousness. It's a pain, really, that has different levels of affecting our ability to deal with regular life circumstances, both pleasant and unpleasant. For me, I feel that my unconsciousness previously had become my way of dealing with my depressions and my past. I just didn't really know it. And our unconsciousness is a feeder system to our mind where we process things. It's our way, unconsciously, to live in the world that we live in. It's our way of dealing with our realities rather than accepting our realities for what they are. I hope that makes sense. If not, please feel free to ask me any questions about that in the Epiphany Vault. For me, this is such a deep topic. It's taken years of study and self-reflection to understand this. I'm definitely not perfect, ever. What is perfect anyways? But when I started to think about what to discuss on this podcast, I knew that I wanted to talk about control. I realized that control is a major piece to the codependency puzzle, and that control plays out in the interactions we have with others, and even more significantly the interactions that the conversations that we have with ourselves. So for the next 10 episodes, we'll talk about different elements and trigger points of control as it relates to codependency. So let's start and talk about confrontation. If you flinch at the word, just the word itself, confrontation, I am right there with you. Just thinking about it makes me want to run away and move to a different state. Kind of joking, but I have done that multiple times, and I'll talk about that later. Or you may be the type of person that welcomes confrontation. I am not one, but I have observed those people that do. So what is it about confrontation that weaves its way into our codependent lives? For me, my family of origin taught me how to deal with confrontation. Essentially, we didn't. There really never was any. Little communication, rare family discussions. I learned to put on a perfect front. I learned to mold myself into the perfect person so I wouldn't have to deal with anyone disliking me, which I feel like is a form of confrontation. I learned to smile instead of protest or cry. I learned that being happy, or in most cases, acting like I was happy, was the only way of living life. What I learned is that not by being able to deal with the ups and downs of being human and not being able to deal with the inevitable pleasant or unpleasant occurrences in life, I was in effect avoiding confrontation. This was, in my opinion, a product of my unconscious self not being able to deal with my current reality as it popped up time and again. In a way, avoiding confrontation is a way for our unconscious to protect us. It's our fight or flight mode. It's protecting us from the emotional heartbreaks of fear and shame, but in reality, it just takes us further and further from the truth, from the real and present now as it is. It forgets how to emotionally own up to situations. It has a funky way of distorting our reality and shaping it to make sense. It says, confrontation is bad, run. My reactions to any type of confrontation, whether that be feedback at work or from a friend, a talk with my significant other, or really anything casting a negative light or tapping into fear and shame, was defensiveness, a complete and utter shutdown, and debilitating insecurity. It's hard to take that type of feedback when you already feel badly about yourself. So that's why I try to instill self-love and self-worth into my daily life and speak about it so often here on the podcast. So what does confrontation have to do with control? Our reactions to confrontation, real, perceived, or otherwise, is how we control our environment. When we run away, it's our way of controlling that hurt. When we clam up, it's our way of controlling, of not letting anything in or out for that matter. When we act defensively, this is the most reactive portion of our codependency, and that is our literal defense. Remember, fight or flight. So what about, I was thinking as well, on the other side of the coin. I've been talking about controlling and confrontation from the submissive perspective because that's the one I know best. But what about from the dominant side? Is confrontation a form of control from a dominant personality? I would say so. Much of the same unconscious tendencies and patterns run the same gamut in a dominant personality, and for much of the same reasons. They just manifest differently. Many dominant personalities control with confrontation. They have no problem actively expressing displeasure or even bullying. Many welcome a fight, physically, mentally, or verbally. I think it is also their way of controlling the situation. It is an unconscious adaptation to feeling insecure or vulnerable, a way, again, to block their fear or shame or insecurities. Does that make sense? For me, when I think about this, it's so eye-opening. When I think about both sides of the coin like this, even though I am more on the submissive side, no matter how many times I've studied this, I always have a big aha moment. Why dominant and submissive roles form that codependent relationship. And if we go back to what my definition of codependency is, which is a break from ourselves, a state of not being able to tap into and love who we really are, aligned with a lack of self-love and self-worth. And because we are not able to do those things with our codependency, we are not able to establish clear boundaries with ourselves and with anyone else. When we can't connect with ourselves, we are not able to set these boundaries. We get confused on what confrontation really is, at least, again, from a submissive perspective. But our gut unconscious reaction is to protect ourselves instead of communicating boundaries, communicating in general, discussing, or even being connected to our present in those unconscious feelings, if that makes any sense. Look, it is not our fault. It's how we've been trained. If you're thinking about things, please be kind to yourself out there, magnificent souls. I think that's the most important thing that we can do. But I hope this did help. This discussion helped you in seeing how control might fit in, and specifically confrontation to any codependent scenario out there. So next time, I'll see you for part 2 of the control series. Living and loving.